Twilight Princess, a Zelda game that I know exists but have actually never played before. I know that there's a wolf in it and you can get 2 hook shots, but is it really worth it? Is it as good as games like Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, The Wind Waker? Let's find out. Twilight Princess, of course, was the last Nintendo title for GameCube and was a launch title for the Wii in America. I'm playing the HD version on the Wii U, and it's actually the first time I've played the Wii U, as I'm sure you can probably tell. The Wii version is notorious for being a mirrored version of the GameCube edition, in order to make Link appear right-handed for the motion controls. I own this version, and since I have the Wii U version now, I really don't need this copy anymore. Sorry. Twilight Princess follows the 3D Zelda structure in core gameplay. The biggest thing that stuck out to me was the size of the game. This map is massive, or at least it feels like it. Nintendo really wanted to emphasize horse riding and horse riding combat, which was a feature planned for Ocarina of Time but ultimately scrapped due to technical restraints. Riding as Epona or even running around as Wolf Link feels very fun. Movement in general is a large improvement to previous entries, and combat is very fleshed out with a large variety of moves and of course, Wolf Link, which adds even more gameplay options. Taking notes from Majora's Mask, Twilight Princess's most notable feature is a transformation into Wolf Link. As a wolf, Link can move faster, bite enemies, and use Midna's power to defeat them rather quickly. Wolf Link can also dig into new areas and use his senses to spot clues for puzzles. When you're able to switch between both forms at will, it opens a huge potential for puzzle solving and combat, and the mixture of these forms, especially in dungeons, feels very expansive instead of being limited to just our usual human Link. Early parts in the game involve Link being trapped in this wolf form. Since the twilight is bleeding into Hyrule, you have to find these tears of twilight, or white grapes as I call them, to be able to restore the area and be able to be human. I can see how people can find this tedious, and in the beginning I was frustrated that I was forced to be a wolf, but you only need to do this about 3 times and it's not too bad. In later sections I would hate having to be forced to use wolf form just because being Link was too much fun. Wolf Link also gets the ability to howl. Similar to the Ocarina or other Zelda instruments, you use these to unlock sweet wolf cinematics. Once you howl with the wolf, you can find him later on in the overworld to teach you a new sword technique. These add an even further depth to combat, and was a fun way to steadily get stronger throughout the game. The game's story is pretty intense, and for a Zelda game it's very adult. The game has a much more mature feeling when compared to previous titles, and that identity stays throughout the game. Some of the more memorable moments, like the history of the Twilight Realm, or even Ganondorf's introduction in the game, are either violent or just way more sinister than what's typically in a Zelda game. Twilight Princess has a large cast of memorable characters, from the Children of Ordon to Zant, the mysterious villain that has this menacing vibe to him. And of course, we can't forget about Midna. She plays a big role in the story, and honestly speaking, she's one of my favorite companions in a Zelda game. She's sassy, she doesn't bother you like some other people do, and her presence is just nice, and very helpful in combat. Twilight Princess has a bunch of dungeons, and it introduces some unique items to the series. The first temple is the Forest Temple. It's fairly okay. The gimmick here is that you have monkeys that you have to save, and as you go through, they start helping you reach other areas. You also get the first item here, which is the Gale Boomerang. It stuns enemies just like the boomerang typically does, but this one is infused with the power of the wind, so it can turn propellers to solve puzzles or move bridges and bring items to you as well. You also get introduced to Oko, who is this cursed chicken monster, and I hate it. But it allows you to transport back to the beginning of the dungeon, and of course I never used it because she's terrifying. Anyway, the first boss here is Diababa, and your monkey friend comes to help you with some bombs, so you just boomerang the bombs to throw at the boss, pretty straightforward, and that's the first dungeon down. Next up is the Goron Mines in Death Mountain, which is connected to this game's Kakariko Village, and I gotta say, this Kakariko is probably the ugliest one I've ever seen. It's dusty and small and just looks bad. Ordon is essentially the proper Kakariko Village in this game, but anyway, the dungeon does some really cool stuff with the Iron Boots, which you do need to access Death Mountain in the first place. You acquire them from the mayor of Ordon, who teaches you how to sumo wrestle, so you can show the Gorons who's boss. At this point, this was my favorite dungeon. The mixture of the hero's bow and iron boots led to some really fun wall and ceiling climbing, and a really cool mid-boss and final boss, Virus. Of course, this is where Dodongos show up, and they were very cool. Enemies in general look very realistic in this game, a stark contrast to the cutesy Wind Waker, and that's a good thing. Next is Lakebed Temple, also known as this game's Water Temple in the Zora domain. And this temple is awful. Maybe the worst water temple I've encountered, and definitely my least favorite temple here. The only saving grace is that you acquire the hook shot, or I mean the claw shot. The central room of turning the staircase and having to move waterways to open paths and raise the water level just really got me. It's similar in concept to the Ocarina of Time water temple, and I hate that one too. Not even mentioning your stunted movement underwater, this dungeon has a lot of back and forth and just felt bad. It was at this point that I first got stuck. I remembered that I did own the Collector's Edition strategy guide, which could help, but it's actually the Wii version, so that's kinda useless here, sorry. Eventually I was able to persevere and enter the final room. The boss, Morpheal, uses the claw shot to grab onto him and slash him like a Shadow of the Colossus fight, which is awesome. And yes, Shadow of the Colossus came out before Twilight Princess, so I can say that. Anyway, that's it for the Water Temple, and thank Hylia we're out of here. Like other Zelda titles, after the first 3 dungeons, you get a larger bit of story exposition to set up the rest of the game, and it's no different here. Once you leave Zora's domain, you get an encounter with Zant, and he wounds Midna and traps you into wolf form. A weakened Midna tells you to take you to Princess Zelda, and in this sense of urgency, you run to Hyrule Castle, while the game's flagship music track plays, Midna's Lament. And as it does, the danger music keeps interrupting the atmosphere. Get the heck out of here! I hate this danger music. You finally get to the top of the castle and meet Princess Zelda. She attempts to save Midna, and in doing so, transfers her spirit into Midna and fades away or dies or something. Anyway, Zelda being mostly absent in this game to me was astounding. I mean, we don't usually get a lot of her anyway, but she was pretty much gone from now till the end of the game. During the sequence, you're also told to go to the Sacred Grove near the Faron Woods to acquire the Master Sword. This is where you encounter what looks like Skull Kid and, oh boy, it's the Lost Woods. I hate the Lost Woods. You get the Master Sword thankfully, and now you get to go to another staple Zelda location, the Gerudo Desert. This dungeon was one of my favorites. It's the first one that requires both the use of Link and his wolf form to complete everything. The first section is very reminiscent of the Forest Temple from Ocarina of Time, where you have to defeat these Poes to unlock the second half of the dungeon, etc. You do get a very strange and new item in this dungeon called the Spinner. It can latch on the tracks on the walls to go across gaps, and it can also be placed in one spot in the ground to spin and activate gears or ancient dungeon technology things. This dungeon does go very well with the spinner. The final boss itself is one of my favorites, possibly my favorite in this game. The spinner outside of the dungeon, however, hardly gets used as much as I would have liked. After you complete this dungeon, you get to see a cutscene from the sages that tell you how they tried to kill Ganon, but he escaped into the Twilight Realm. Like, they straight up show him getting stabbed in the chest. As surprising as it may be, this game actually is rated T for teen for fantasy violence. Snow Peak Mountain. Now this is my favorite dungeon in the game. You arrive at Snow Peak by following a Yeti by snowboard to his house, and it is awesome. The Yeti's wife is sick, and he's making soup to make her feel better. So you really are just going around their house looking for the mirror shard, and it's very fun, especially for an ice dungeon. The puzzles here are fun as well, and the item you get, the ball and chain, is just plain hilarious. You use it to shatter any sort of large rocks or ice structures, things of that nature. When you get to the boss room, you find out that the boss of this dungeon is actually the Yeti's wife, who's been corrupted by one of the mirror shards. This felt like such an unorthodox dungeon, and I loved it for being something different. Next, Link returns to the Sacred Grove to get access to the Temple of Time, which, as a dungeon, is very cool. The feature here is that you get an item called the Dominion Rod, which allows Link to control various statues. You work your way up to the top of the temple to get the rod, and then you have to guide a statue from the top all the way to the bottom to open the boss room. I really enjoyed this design, and even if it was a more linear experience, it was a lot of fun. Much like the spinner, the Dominion Rod doesn't get used much outside of combat. It does become plot relevant later, so that's a nice touch. The boss in this dungeon is Arumagoma? Basically Goma from Ocarina of Time, but it's has metal on it. Anyway, he's a big spider, and you get to smash him with these statues. Pretty straightforward and satisfying. Next up is the City in the Sky, which is where the Okoa live? Apologies for my pronunciation. But anyway, they remember that cursed chicken, Oko? Or Oku? Whatever? Anyway, they greet you here, and they tell you that there's this dragon that's been terrorizing the town, so you have to stop him. This dungeon is unique in that there's a shop towards the entrance, which is really weird, but I'm all for it. Aesthetically, this dungeon just looks very nice. The item you get here is the Claw Shot. Again, yay! So you get 2, and it makes movement so much fun, just swinging from one area to another. I did have some frustrations trying to get to the final area for the boss, but once I did get there, that dragon, Argarok, was actually a really fun fight. And with that, we have all the Twilight Mirror Shards. With all the shards in place, we now go to enter the realm of Twilight and face Zant. This is technically a dungeon, but it is rather short. The premise here is to grab these balls of light and take them back to the entrance to unlock Zant's area. This is also the only area in the game that features the very famous Floor Master enemies, and I really like their design here. I usually hate the Floor Masters in general, but these are slower moving, and the gimmick is that they won't focus on Link, but rather the orbs that you're carrying. After this, your Master Sword gets infused with light, and it makes killing shadows way faster. You also get to face Zant head-on and learn more about his character. Turns out he's actually kind of insane, and not in a good way. I preferred him when he was much more mysterious and less crazy. His fight makes you redo some previous sequences from the first couple of dungeons before having a one-on-one confrontation. With him defeated, you go to the final area of the game, Hyrule Castle. Hyrule Castle as the last dungeon of the game was a huge treat. It's separated by an outside portion, which is haunted by a lack of music, to an inside area that has an eerie rendition of the classic castle theme as you slowly make your way to the top, defeating waves of enemies in the process. There aren't many puzzles here, as it's a way to just confront Ganon and save Princess Zelda. You first have to fight Zelda, who is being controlled by Ganon with the classic Zelda tennis game we all know and love. Then, you fight Beast vs. Beast with Ganon himself. Then, Zelda does the traditional let's summon the light arrows thing, and you do a neat horseback riding sequence, and I gotta say, the cinematography here is just outstanding. Once knocked off his horse, you enter the final duel, Link vs. Ganon. Once again with stellar presentation, and you have to use everything you got, everything in your arsenal to defeat Ganon, and that's the end of the game. Midna gets restored to her original form, and decides, of course, to go back to the Twilight Realm. However, she ends up destroying the mirror in the process to prevent another catastrophe between the two worlds, but this also means you could never visit her again. It's a very somber moment to end the game on, however, the world is saved, and your quest is over. The Wii U version here is absolutely the way to play this game. The gamepad includes an instant transformation wolf button, which is super handy. With beautiful visuals as well, it's totally worth it. The only downfall is when you see a big chest and solve an intricate puzzle just to get a Miiverse stamp. These are only usable for the Miiverse, and since that service is discontinued, these are worthless. And the fact that they appear in the same chests that heart pieces do really just makes you mad when you find one. Twilight Princess has a ton of content already in its dungeons and main story, and yet there are so many side events and other things to do. I especially love the pacing of this game. Instead of going from one dungeon to the next, there's a lot of really unique and interesting events that bridge the story and make the game feel longer, but not in a lazy or bad way. One that stands out to me are the recurring fights with King Bulbin. There's also different gameplay aspects, like this Star Fox type flying sequence to enter Lake Hylia for the first time, the raiding of the Gerudo Desert with these boars that can destroy anything in their path, and who could forget the sumo wrestling? It's these moments that add to the charm and pacing of the game to make it feel like so much more. However, you also get some bad moments like this. For example, the sequence where you have to protect the cart with this forced horse combat, or the aforementioned white grape fetch quests early on when you're trapped as a wolf. The ideas behind these are solid, but execution is lacking with some of these minor events. Twilight Princess is a complete Zelda experience. It builds up on what the previous 3D Zeldas established while still maintaining its own identity as a more adult game and plot, but with unique dungeons, gameplay variety, and memorable characters and story moments. I don't think I love this game as much as The Wind Waker, but I would consider it on the same tier, if not a little bit better than Ocarina of Time. Overall, it's a very solid game that I do see myself revisiting in the future. To me, it takes Ocarina's ageless formula and adds on to be something great. It baffles me that this was a GameCube title. And I know it's a different experience on the original Wii with the motion controls, but with the Wii U edition here, I think this is the definitive version to play. And that's Twilight Princess. This game took me a little bit over 30 hours to complete, so there's a lot of content here, and I do honestly think it's a very good Zelda game. Is it one of your favorites? Perhaps even your absolute favorite Zelda game? Let me know, and in the meantime, thank you for watching. Have a nice rest of your day.